Welcome back to the Hey Chaplain podcast. My name is Jared Altic, and I'm a chaplain with the police department. Today, I'm bringing you an interview from another podcast called Blue Canary. Steve Kellams, who runs Blue Canary, has devoted this most recent season of his show to leadership topics in law enforcement. And he brought me on to talk about informal leadership, where as a chaplain, I have influence and practice leadership, but I don't have any actual authority. We ended up talking about several wellness topics and some of my philosophy of chaplaincy, as well as why I started my show, Hey Chaplain. I asked Steve if I could use a condensed version of the interview that he published, and he agreed. So this is a slightly shorter version of the conversation that we had. Steve started the interview by asking me about my background and about why I got into police chaplaincy. And this was my answer.
Death notifications. That's what got me pulled in. My background is that I am a pastor at a church. Been working in a church for almost 30 years. And I had a lot of cops in my church. That was my only connection to law enforcement. I loved them, but I probably didn't understand them very well. But over the years of ministering to them and to their families and what have you, I began to really, really love them. In fact, a couple of them became very close friends. And I had always had the idea of police chaplaincy in the back of my head because my predecessor at this church was a police chaplain. And so I was kind of aware that that was a possibility here in Kansas City, that there was an association of chaplains that served the fire department, the police department, the sheriff's office. And so I kind of was aware of it, but death notifications, I hear these, 25, 30-year-old officers and detectives that are having to go tell someone at 5 o'clock in the morning that their teenage child had died in a traffic accident. And I'm like, man, why are we putting that burden on our cops? They have so many other difficult things to do. I do funerals for a living. I could do that. And so I investigated and got involved and got some training and eventually became a full-fledged police chaplain. And I still do death notifications. In fact, I did one yesterday. But it opened up a whole world of other involvement in counseling police officers and coming alongside and just being present with them in the midst of the traumatic things that they see, responding to critical incidents and, homicides and suicides and accidents and all kinds of other things, visiting the police station, going on ride-alongs, being involved. And now I still work at the church full time, but boy, it's almost another full-time job just being involved with the police department.
Most of the cops listening just fell in love with you whenever you said you were going to do those death notifications.
Yeah.
I remember doing them myself. They were always so difficult. I never felt like there was a right way to do it. And I know that I, as well as some other supervisors, we tended to get into a rhythm of how we did it no matter what. And that's not always the best approach. The other jobs that you do, actually, we were chatting before we came on that I kind of wanted to talk about here. If all you do is death notifications, you kind of have a dark shadow around you, don't you?
Yes. I have had that more than once where, especially when I first got involved, I was trained to go, be out at the police station and go to the fire stations, go get involved, build rapport, let the officers know you by name and know them by name. And when I first started showing up, people were scared to death. In fact, I spooked a whole firehouse of firefighters. I knocked on their door and they thought that somebody, like they'd lost a family member. They thought there's no reason a chaplain would show up at the firehouse unless, one of our family members had died. And no, I was just there to say hi. And and that took a while to kind of get over that miscommunication of, why did chaplains exist? Well, chaplains are there. And in fact, some of those close friends of mine, I'm on their list. If something were to happen to them in the line of duty, I am the one that would go to their family. And so that's an ominous and difficult task that I hope I never have to do. But I am trying to build rapport and trying to build familiarity with these officers so that if they have a crisis, they already have familiarity with me. They don't have to go talk to a stranger. I would be at least one of the options where they have a helper who knows them and has been embedded in their profession. I know their language. I know the jargon. I know the environment. I know who they work for and what kind of things they deal with. And I would be at least one of the choices to go find help and support. And that's what a chaplain is. He's an embedded helper.
I'm very interested about the relationship and confidentiality there. Do you have an official role within the Kansas City, Kansas Police Department? Are you an external feature to that? And then how does confidentiality apply?
Yeah, I am a volunteer there. One of my name badges, I have a couple name badges that hangs on a lanyard around my neck. And one of them, we were looking, they're all color coded. And we're looking at, it's like, so technically, I think I'm an independent contractor, but I'm an unpaid independent contractor with the county. I think is probably somewhere on a spreadsheet. That's probably how I'm designated. So I am very much a part of the department. I've got one foot in the department. I actually, when I'm on call, I drive a department vehicle and I've got access. I can swipe this name badge and get in the buildings and I've been given a lot of access. But at the same time, I'm not an employee of the county. I'm not an employee of the city. And so I've got one foot in and one foot out. And that's a delicate balance. And there's pros and cons to that. I mean, and on one hand, if someone comes and talks to me, I am outside of the chain of command. I'm outside of their decisions about discipline or promotions. I don't want to touch that. If I ever got invited to sit on a promotion board, I would refuse it because I feel like that would ruin my connection with these officers. So that's an advantage that I'm an outsider. But it's a terrible disadvantage because building trust with a police officer, I mean, there's nobody more skeptical than a cop. And so building trust takes a long time, like on the order of years, like 18 months, 2 years, 3 years to build trust where a police officer would allow an outsider to come in and stand on scene with him or be in the station with him or be in the car with him. And he'd actually open up about what he thinks and what he feels. That just doesn't happen naturally. It doesn't happen easily.
So I do know that time, can be a great helper to that as people start becoming comfortable with you around. But there's got to be more than that to building trust. What other things do you do to start building that foundation so they will talk to you when they have issues?
Presence. Not like Christmas presents, but my presence, my availability, my being on scene. I go to like 180 roll calls a year. In our department, that's divided up between 3 patrol divisions. And so there's 3 different stations. And sometimes I'll hit, all 3 of those in the same night because their roll calls are staggered. And I'll go to those different roll calls. And a lot of times I don't have anything to say. I'm not going to get up and, smack them with a Bible or anything like that. I am just standing in the back of the room and I'm paying attention to all the instructions that are given and the different, ups and downs of everything from, well, here's some information about your retirement and here's a missing car that we're looking for. And here's whatever. And just all the different variety of things that they're involved in. I'm there too. I see the ups and the downs and the highs and the lows and the rhythm of their work environment. And then I go on ride-alongs, or I'm in the car with them, and I don't go for an hour. I go for the whole shift. And that builds rapport. That builds trust. It's like, hey, he keeps showing up. And so some of the guys who were very standoffish, when a chaplain walks in the room, there are kind of 2 reactions. One cop was swearing up a storm and he sees the chaplain walk in and he blushes and he puts his hand over his mouth and he's like, oh my goodness, what did I just say? I'm so sorry, chaplain. And he starts apologizing. The other cop starts swearing more. And that's a type of stiff arm. And they're like, look at how rough I am, chaplain. You don't want any part of me. I'm too far gone. Don't come after me. I'm a lost cause. And some of them, I've actually had one say that to me. I don't believe that, for one, because I've just made up my mind. I like these guys. I don't always like what they do. We've had officers that have broken the law, that have lost their jobs, even gone to jail. I don't necessarily like everything they do, and I certainly don't always like how they act and how they treat themselves. But I like them. And so I just keep showing up. And some of those guys who were stiff arming me and they were dropping F-bombs to see if I could be scared away. Well, I wasn't scared away. And cops will do that. They'll push you away to see if you can be pushed away. And so I wasn't pushed away. And some of those cops have become very close friends now after several years. But it took a long time of me showing up, being present over and over and over and over again. And that's where a lot of chaplains fall down, is that they show up one time and people were rude to them, so they don't ever show up again. And they've missed that opportunity to make an impact in these officers.
You said something I think was very important just a moment ago. As I've talked to a variety of people about leadership, a common thread within that is caring about your people and legitimately caring about your people. And you just said something about how officers treat themselves. We don't do a very good job of taking care of ourselves, do we?
No. In fact, there's a type of officer, because officers are different. I mean, there's some things that are true of all police officers, but as you get to know police officers, wow, there's a lot of variety. And even though they're a self-selecting group that have a lot in common, there's also, like I said, a lot of variety. And these officers have, there's officers who are very healthy. There's officers who have a 30-year marriage to one person. And, they've done things well. They don't abuse alcohol. They get 8 hours of sleep every night. I mean, there are some cops like that. But there's a lot of cops who have kind of a fatalistic attitude that, hey, I chose this career. I'm going to live hard and die young. And that's just how it is. They don't take care of themselves. And that's why you see these statistics where, cops are, not only do you have high alcoholism rate, suicide rate, divorce rate, but then you have a life expectancy that's in some cases like 20 years younger than the national average. And these guys are dying in their 50s and 60s because they never took care of themselves. And there's a myriad of different, factors in that go into that. But a large part of it was they could have prevented some of these health outcomes, and they just don't, because, that's my lot in life. And they have that fatalistic attitude. And I feel like they need to be told, hey, no, we care about you. I mean, this is more than just receiving a tin of popcorn at Christmas time. I'm going to show up all year long, all the time, and I'm going to keep telling you that you're valuable and that we care about you. And that we want you to be healthy, and that we want you to be planning for what your next chapter is after you retire, because law enforcement careers are not long. And so a long career in law enforcement's maybe 25 or 30 years. And so you're going to be basically middle-aged and retired. What's your plan? What are you going to do to be productive? What are you going to do to be healthy? What are you going to do to keep investing in your family after this chapter of your life is over? And so I just keep coming at them with that. Sometimes that's direct and I say it out loud. Sometimes it's indirect. I just show up and I show that I care.
And this is part of the leadership that I really wanted to talk with you about, because I feel like we do have a problem with leadership across the United States at the high levels of public safety. Mm-hmm. They typically treat the officers like furniture. And when officers know that their bosses don't care about them, that they're no different than the chair or the desk, they often start thinking of themselves the same way. Having someone out there that can provide that different approach to leadership, someone that's really pushing that care, and someone that has no reason for it. There's no ulterior motive for you to do that, since you're not tied into the traditional chain of command. Do you find that more powerful for your leadership approach in this, or is it more of a hindrance?
I think it's the secret sauce. Now, I'm playing the long game. I mean, my outcomes are not ones I can measure quarter by quarter. These are outcomes I'm going to measure decade by decade. And so I am wanting to impact retention. I'm wanting to impact, ultimately recruitment, because a happier department recruits better. I want to impact, their health when they're 20 years retired. So some of these things are not things I can measure immediately, but I am convinced that a healthy chaplaincy, which is itself kind of rare because chaplains are just as weird as cops are. We have all the same kind of shortcomings and idiosyncrasies, and not every chaplain's a great chaplain, but a healthy chaplaincy can be the secret sauce that makes a chief's job easier and makes the sergeant's job easier and just really, impacts things like morale and retention and all of those factors that are sometimes really difficult and intangible, hard to move the needle on some of that stuff. And I feel like chaplains are, the way to go.
And that's really interesting. And I do agree with you, but chaplains in public safety are not necessarily common. Everybody doesn't have them. And no. Did you get any pushback from your agency or some of the agencies in your area about having chaplains involved? And with your interactions with other chaplains across the United States, do you hear a lot of stories about them getting those administrators pushed back? And I guess ultimately, why are the administrators not grabbing a hold of this tremendous resource?
Because they've had bad experiences with chaplains. A lot of places don't have chaplains currently because they did 30 years ago or 50 years ago, and it went badly. Because you're bringing in someone who's an outsider. Now, some chaplains are retired first responders. In fact, that's something I'm trying to really push, is to find first responders who are willing to take this on as a ministry and really, invest their lives in it. But a lot of chaplains are clergy, and they've got no first responder experience. And so they're kind of fish out of water. Making that transition and becoming culturally competent is difficult. And some of them just don't do it. And they fail and they misunderstand their role in the department. I mean, imagine, let me go back to the chaplain who is a former first responder. Imagine being a cop for 25 years and then hanging up that hat and becoming a chaplain. And now you're in the car on a ride along and a suspect starts running from you and you want to jump out of the car and chase him down. You can't do that. That's not your job anymore.
Right.
And so it's very easy for a chaplain, regardless of where the chaplain came from, to misunderstand what they're there for and why they're there and where the lines are. And if you cross one of those lines, not only can you get yourself in trouble, but you might destroy the whole chaplaincy program. And I think that has happened so many times through the years where roles have been poorly defined or just the people in those roles have exercised really poor judgment. I think that has ruined chaplaincy in various agencies. And sometimes there's, how many policies are secretly named after a particular officer?
All of them.
Yes. Yeah. I think there are policies about outside helpers coming in that are probably named after particular chaplains that ruined it. And they got too involved, or they crossed a line, or they betrayed someone's trust or confidentiality or whatever it might have been. And that mistake led to, we haven't had a chaplains program here in 30 years. And that's a shame, because a well-trained, committed chaplain, someone who's really called to it, like I said, I feel like that's your secret weapon. But there's not very many of them, and we don't train them very well. And it's inconsistent from one agency to the next about how you train a chaplain and how you prepare a chaplain. And it's kind of a hodgepodge.
That's really interesting as well. Let's talk about that training. What kind of training did you receive for your role as a chaplain? And what kind of training is going on, or lack thereof, is going on around the U.S.?
The training that honestly made the biggest difference for me was being a pastor in a church for 20 plus years. And so I am one of those rare pastors where I got hired by a church in my early 20s, and I've been at my current church for 24 years. And so I've had the same job for a long time. So that means that I am pretty even keeled, and I've learned how to navigate difficult situations without walking away from them. And that kind of investment long term, I'm willing to see this through. I don't have to have immediate results. That kind of conditioning has shaped what sort of chaplain I am. And I think it's served me very well. But not everybody had that. So let's say somebody just wants to become a chaplain and they've not really prepared through their day job or whatever career they've had previously. How did they volunteer then as a chaplain, become effective? Well, there's training. There are local, regional, and national organizations that will train chaplains. And there are chaplains in other fields, like hospital chaplains and prison chaplains and military chaplains. And there's different types of chaplains, different categories, where they have quite a bit of overlap with law enforcement. It's not exactly the same role, but it's similar. And all of those places can train someone and give them some basic tools. They can understand when you're working for, especially a government agency, you need to understand Lemon versus Kurtzman. And, can I stand up and express my religious beliefs to these government employees? Well, the answer is no, you can't do that. If they come to you, you can answer any question you want, but you can't, stand up on a chair and start preaching at them. That'll get you kicked out. So there's Supreme Court case law that has decided, what role does a chaplain have in the military or a police agency or anywhere else. And so there's training from these different places, but the training's not the same. The certifications aren't really very standardized. And frankly, some training's not very good. And so you could have somebody that has clinical pastoral education because they were a hospital chaplain, which is a very advanced and very difficult, rigorous program to become a hospital chaplain. They could have that training, but that training may not be very applicable to law enforcement chaplaincy. And they might be a military chaplain. And some of that is very applicable, but it's also a different animal because they were in the military. They were an actual officer in the United States Army. And that's different when you're a volunteer coming into a police station. That's a different role. And so being able to understand, okay, I was trained in a certain way. Some of that training is valuable, but what do I, how do I modify it to walk into this particular sheriff's office or this particular police station and to work with this executive leadership? What do they expect from me, and how can I modify and adjust what I've learned to fit this circumstance? That takes wisdom, and some people have it and some don't.
Now, I might be circling back around to what we talked about already, but I want to kind of get this on record. How do you lead peers, so people that don't have to listen to you? And as you get in the cars and you're working with the officers and you're noticing issues and you need them to do something for their own benefit, for their own good, how do you do that?
Well, that's what I do at church. There's nobody at church that's required to be there. I can't assign them homework. I can't give people at church, I can't make requirements of them. Every single person at church has the option of just walking away and going to a different church or going to no church at all. And so I have to still be able to give them exhortations, to give them, hey, here's a really challenging thing I want you to consider that's going to shake you down to your boots, but it's important and it could alter your life and have a huge impact on you and your family, and you need to consider it. And so I'm going to put this in front of you, even though it's unpleasant, but I'm going to do that in a way that is for your own good. And I have expressed how I genuinely am concerned for your well-being. And I've built enough trust that even though I'm saying something difficult to you, you understand that I'm not doing this in a way that's antagonistic, and I'm not doing it in a way that's going to drive you away. And so that skill I developed in church is very applicable to chaplaincy because I have no authority. But if I'm talking to somebody and they maybe come to me, which helps, so I'm not forcing it on anybody, but they come to me for help and they know that I don't have a dog in this race. I'm not selling them anything. I don't gain anything from it. I'm volunteering my time. They eventually begin to trust that what I'm saying might be of benefit to them, or at least I intend for it to be of benefit to them. And that slowly wins them over. And it's a process I have to start over. Every recruit that graduates from the academy, I've got to start over and start from zero and slowly build trust with them like that.
So that role as an embedded helper is truly there to help the officer, but getting the officers to actually embrace wellness, we've already talked about some of the issues and problems with that, but wellness has become a big deal within law enforcement over the last decade. We've seen some amazing improvements in law enforcement wellness. And I think at some levels, our newer officers are quicker to embrace some of these concepts. But that's still a big challenge for you because that's primarily your job, right? Is officer wellness. You're there for the officer.
Yeah. I work hand in hand with the wellness officer that we have at our department. We try to coordinate a lot and share information, and like, hey, let's be alert to this shift over here because they just went through something, or so and so's had a lot of sick days recently. Let's make sure we check on them, or so and so's in the hospital. I'm going to make sure that I go visit them while they're there, or they have a family member in the hospital. We do a lot of coordinating like that. But yeah, officer wellness, I mean, it's hard to get everybody on board. We're talking about an industry where people, expect to take it on the chin, and they're willing to suffer silently. And that's frustrating to me. I need them to speak up. I need them to examine themselves and see if they are okay, and not wait until something hits a crisis. And so, but that's part of the proactive work that I'm doing, where I'm getting in and getting to know them ahead of time. And I'm not shy about talking about the stuff that's difficult. Alcohol is huge. And the abuse of alcohol is, I mean, it's in the culture to self-medicate with alcohol. And that's hard to pull that out of the culture. I mean, you graduate from the academy, and the academy instructor awards the class with an expensive bottle of whiskey. That's
right.
It's just ingrained in what they do, and there's very few non-drinkers in law enforcement. But I'll talk about this is what it's doing to you. It's not helping you sleep, it's helping you fall asleep. But then it's going to create insomnia 2 hours later, and you're going to suffer and have a poor night's sleep, and then you're not going to be your best self the next day. You need to be alert to that.
So tell me about how and why you started the Hey Chaplain podcast.
Well, when I started in as a chaplain here about 6 years ago or so, I needed information because I wasn't in law enforcement, and my family was not from law enforcement. I had no law enforcement background at all. So I'm like, okay, how am I going to play catch up here? I've got some good friends who can answer questions for me, but I'm a podcast kind of guy. I've always been a talk radio kind of person. And so I'm like, well, what resources? Surely there's some great podcasts. I know cops are great communicators. I bet there's a bunch of really good podcasts that'll explain this to me in detail. And I struggled to find anything. I really couldn't find very much that could help me. And so I had it in my mind that, I'm just going to have to make this show myself. I'm just going to have to do kind of the equivalent of like a Jordan Harbinger type show, where I'm just going to interview people, and they're going to give really good information. I'm going to pass that on, not just to chaplains, but primarily to police officers, because that's another thing I discovered was I would go ask police officers, and I'd say, okay, so this is how your job works. What about the guy in the next office down the hall? And they're like, I don't know. I've never done that job.
Right.
I'm like, oh, you're kidding. How do you not know? Well, I've never worked in that part. I've always been in operations. I've never been in CSI. And like, you really don't know? And so I had to go find people. And as I found them, I would ask them, okay, so how do you keep a 30-year law enforcement career going? How do you stay married? And how do you fight back against alcoholism? And I got all these really great answers. And then I would ask them, well, when do you go tell the new police officers all the great stuff you know? And most of them just gave me this blank stare. Like, well, I don't. I had to learn it on my own. They have to learn it on their own. And so that was another point. And I was like, okay, I'm not finding the podcast I want. I don't think all the officers know all the other stuff about law enforcement. And so there's some very segregated, siloed tracks here inside of law enforcement. And the good officer wellness type related things, the wisdom, is not being passed down effectively. So I just felt like, okay, this is a mission. I'm going to have to do this. I want to convey this information about their careers, about their wellness, and I'm going to go find the wisest people I can, and I'm going to put them in front of an audience. And that is how Hey Chaplain was born. It's not a religious show. So, sometimes I think I'd lose a certain percentage of audience because they see chaplain. Oh, that's like a religious person. Ew. And they assume that it's a Christian show. It's really not. I go multiple episodes without ever mentioning God, but I think I'm doing God's work by bringing healthiness and wisdom and encouragement to police officers. People will occasionally reach out to me and say that, hey, this really helped me, and I thought I was the only one. That's often the feedback I'm looking for, is when someone says, boy, I thought I was the only one. And I've instead put somebody in front of them in the form of the podcast where they've not only been through the same thing, but they've come out the other side. And officers who put an earbud in and listen to Hey Chaplain at 4:00 in the morning, they need to know that they're not the first ones going through this.
Any last thoughts to share with officers out there that are starting their leadership journeys or starting to get involved in law enforcement and starting to see what's really going on out there?
Yeah, attitude is contagious. And there's a natural tendency in law enforcement to be cynical and jaded and negative. And I know, your department is the worst department ever. And the city doesn't care about you. And your supervisors and the administration don't care about you. And this is the worst. And everything's awful. And the people in our town are a bunch of idiots. And I know that's how we all talk. But that attitude is contagious. And be careful, because you may be driving away the help that you desperately need. We don't have surplus manpower these days. And so please be careful before you gripe the next time. Be careful who's listening and what impact that's having on them. Are you pushing somebody out of the job earlier than they need to be, or even, squashing someone who's just coming into it because of your bad attitude? And I'm not saying you shouldn't gripe, but take that gripe over to the chaplain and let the chaplain, hear you vent about it. Maybe don't do that in front of a bunch of young, impressionable cops who may just decide to go sell insurance instead of being a police officer.